Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. The day is July 15th, 2017, and today the name of the game is The Danger of Government Overreach and Government Power. You know, there's an old saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And with a few stories today, I'm going to demonstrate why it's so dangerous to grant government said power. The Department of Homeland Security is now using facial recognition technology to scan Americans' faces when they're leaving the country. They're doing this at 6 airports, including in New York. So recently when I went to Jamaica a few months back, I'm sure they scanned my face. And the most disturbing part about this story is, one, there's zero press. So the public isn't even aware that the government is using this facial technology to scan the faces of Americans. Two, there was no debate about this. You know, America's supposed to be a country that values privacy, but more and more with everything we see from government after government, whether that's, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter, Bush, Obama, they all just expand the spy state. Big Brother keeps growing, and even after Edward Snowden, someone like him, blows the whistle and exposes that the NSA has been engaging in a vast overreach, spying on Americans all over the world, really through 6 degrees of separation. The NSA is able to record and keep pretty much every electronic conversation that we have. And there's no discussion about it, and when it's exposed, nobody is held accountable. Instead, the politicians will, using Snowden as an example, they will use the media as a bully pulpit to convince the public that someone like Snowden is actually the traitor to the people, that he has committed treason and he needs to be tracked down, tried, murdered, arrested. When in reality, the people that were committing the grossly unconstitutional crimes of spying on all Americans are getting away scot-free. No one's ever held accountable, and no real change ever takes place. The spy state only grows. So you're not going to hear this from the mainstream media, but the Department of Homeland Security, again, in 6 airports, is using facial recognition, and usually the way the government operates, this will be their trial run. The government will decide they like this, and they'll quietly put through another piece of legislation where they're using facial recognition technology at every airport in America, and of course, you won't get one bit of outrage from the public. Now, why is this a problem? Right? Okay, I'm not doing anything wrong. Why should I care if the government is spying on me? It's a good question. Glad you asked. You know, another story this week, Peter Smith, a longtime GOP oppositional research consultant, was found dead. He apparently murdered himself by taking a plastic bag, putting it over his head, closing it up, and suffocating himself to death. Smith had been investigating the Clintons, and of course, as I'm sure you're aware by now, Sean Lucas was a process server who served up a lawsuit against the DNC, killed himself. Seth Rich, who Julian Assange implies was a WikiLeaks source, shot twice in the back. Vince Foster, way back when, found dead. So people who are associated with or seem to go against the Clintons continuously wind up dead. And this serves as a great example of how dangerous the spy state can be. Say you're talking about someone like me, right? You guys follow me, and I'm continuously investigating corrupt things that the government does. Let's say I come across some piece of information that is detrimental to a person in power. Well, the people in power can use the spy state to stop whistleblowers or investigative journalists from ever exposing corruption. And this is where the term power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely comes into play, because the more power we as Americans give up to the politicians, it creates a scenario where what Snowden terms as turnkey tyranny. So yes, if the power is being used for good, oh yes, it's all fine and dandy. But what we find throughout American history is that power is generally not used as it's sold to the public. It's used to help the political elite, the political powerful, establish that power so that they can use it against political enemies. And this is a very dangerous and slippery slope. Now we said, okay, they're going to use power against political enemies. How does this tie in? Well, I have a third story this week. Ellen Weintraub, the head Democrat for the FEC, the Federal Exchange Commission, led a charge this week to have subpoenas filed against InfoWars, Breitbart, and the Drudge Report. Now, these are non-establishment, but very popular news agencies. And often, as we see so much, who lean to the right of the political spectrum. Mainly, when I say lean to the right, libertarian. They lean, well, Breitbart's more conservative, a little more toward establishment politics, but especially, Drudge Report only links to news articles from all across the political spectrum, and InfoWars, people think it's a conspiracy site, but what it really is a libertarian site which exposes a lot of the corrupt things our government does. Do I agree with everything they say? No, but I appreciate the platform they give to many whistleblowers who are trying to expose corruption within government. So anyway, Ellen Weintraub is attempting to use the power of the FEC to have government subpoenas against these news agencies. And this is a gross overreach against the First Amendment, against freedom of the press, because this isn't about Russian collusion. As we've seen the whole time, there's baseless story after baseless story claiming Russian collusion, which is really just, it's the new McCarthyism. It's a political attack. So they're saying that, oh, well, InfoWars pushed stories that were, that's something that the Kremlin would have wanted. And Breitbart pushed stories that the Kremlin would have wanted. And Drudge Report pushed stories that the Kremlin would have wanted, right? They all reported on WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks is the Kremlin. So now you could label news agencies who go against the political establishment as being agents of foreign countries, and you could use government power to shut them down. Now, luckily, this proposal was actually voted down, but it's a prime example of how government power can be used to silence dissent, and that is really the bedrock of America, because once people like me, people like InfoWars, people like the Drudge Report, Breitbart get shut down, and you could do the same thing. There's sites that promote left-wing politics that aren't establishment talking heads that I'm sure the government would love to shut down using government power, and of course they never sell it to that as the people, but that's what it really is. So you see how these stories tie together, and how it's never sold to the public as, oh, well, we're going to use set power to shut down political dissent, but that's how it always works, right? The Patriot Act is called the Patriot Act. This is for Americans. It doesn't say this is to spy on Americans to push the agenda of the political elite on both sides of the aisle. They'll act like they go against it, but in reality, they're both very much for it. The country always drives in the same direction, right? Obama goes against the Patriot Act, and then he authorizes amendments to the NDAA, which allow the FEC Board of Governors to attack political websites as being for foreign governments. So they talk a big game, and then they always push the government in a certain direction. And, I had a debate with my friend recently about net neutrality, because on its face it looks good. And I've looked a lot into it. I don't claim to be the leading expert on net neutrality, but what I found is that the funding for net neutrality is coming from the big mega corporations, right? Google, Amazon, George Soros are pouring millions and millions of dollars into net neutrality. And what it's really about is promoting government regulation of the internet, because they're going to sell it as one thing. Oh, this is so that everyone can have the internet. And then what they do is, once you get government regulatory power, they start to push things like, oh, well, this is hate speech. This needs to be shut down. And now the government has the authority to do it. So something like net neutrality, where on its face it looks good, might be another thing where, and again, I preface might, because I don't claim to be the number one expert on that topic, but my red alert alarms are going off in my head saying, is this an example of the government trying to take over the internet and using it for censorship to promote an establishment narrative and to shut down narratives that go against the establishment. So these are all things we have to look out for. Now, speaking of control, and I will link all of these stories at the bottom of where I post it, because I think it's important that you are able to see the stories where I get them from, and you could read through them and judge for yourself whether you agree with me or disagree. If you disagree, tell me, that's fine. I think it's very important as Americans we engage in dialect with one another. You know, I have no problem. I actually love engaging in conversations with really hard quote-unquote liberals or people who subscribe to the Democratic Party. And the reason I love it is because if we don't have open dialect with one another, I'll talk with a communist, I'll talk with a fascist. If we don't have open dialect with one another, we'll never find common ground, and we'll just remain divided, which I think is what the political establishment wants. So, anyway, back to my point. Another story which gets to government control. This week, Visa unleashed a new plan where they are pressuring merchants. They're offering $10,000 to offer upgraded, I guess, credit card systems for merchants all over the country, but with a caveat. They will only give the $10,000 if those merchants agree to no longer accept cash. So they agree to only accept credit card. Now, I don't know how aware you are of it, and I will get into it in the future with my investigative reports, which I think you guys really appreciate. Because, yeah, this is me talking, right? This is my opinion in a way. I'm reporting on the news, reports on something that's been going on for decades known as the war on cash, where the government, the credit card companies there was public outrage. But basically, if they are successful with this war on cash, where merchants only accept credit cards, then imagine the power that gives the government. Because now you're in a situation where if you go against the government, they could bring up some kind of false claim against you, right? Like we discussed, hate speech. Well, who decides what hate speech is? They could use stuff like that to freeze assets of people who provide political dissent. And again, it creates a situation, like Snowden said, of turnkey tyranny. Because imagine now you go against the government, they bring up some false charge against you, they freeze your assets, you can't run away, you can't eat, because you literally don't have any money. Everything you had, you don't have cash. Everything you had is frozen. So the country continues in a direction toward tyranny. And I think this is something very important for us to recognize as a people. So I'll continue to report on things of this nature, and I hope that I could really reach some people on the dangers of continuing to give the government more and more power. Because this two-party system is really, I think, a one-party system, the political elite versus. And hopefully we could continue to spread that message, throughout the populace. Two more stories I wanted to cover today. First, there was another major pedophile bust. 87,000 people. This took place in Germany. A website, Elysium, where they cracked down on it, where, basically it's the dark net, and they found 87,000 people using it to push child porn and things like that. And I don't know how aware you are of it. I have reported on it ad nauseum at FFRnews on my Facebook page. But since Trump has taken office, there has been a huge, and I preface huge, uptake in the arrest in pedophile networks. There has been major pedophile networks busted in Pennsylvania, busted in California, busted in Florida. And obviously that's positive that these networks are taken down. But what I don't think many people are aware of are how intertwined these pedophile networks are within our media, within our political establishment, which is why you don't hear this reported on by the mainstream media, right? They're so for the people that they continuously cover up major busted pedophile networks. So that's all you have to know about the mainstream media. But if you look into our politics, there's Dennis Hastert was the Speaker of the House. Has been caught multiple times now engaged in pedophilia, and of course these people don't get in trouble. There was Sir Edward Heath in England, who was the Prime Minister of England, right? That's essentially the President of the United States, who has a tremendous amount after his political career, so you can't say it's political, of allegations of young children saying he engaged in just absolutely grotesque and unhumane acts against them. The number 3 person at the Vatican just last week was caught engaging in pedophilia, and don't think that the Vatican is not political. You know, there are these systems of control, right? If you understand history of the Vatican, always had tremendous political power. The royal house in England always had tremendous political power. And the media and the political elite will have you think that one day they just said, oh, you know what, democracy's better, and they gave up this power. If you know power, people don't give up power of that nature. So they've maintained these powers of control, but they've understood that the best way to gain control is to have the masses think that you've given up control, that you're not in it, because then if there's insurrection, they'll never come for you. So just be aware that these institutions do still wage certain degrees of control over our political systems that the masses are largely unaware of and that the mainstream media won't report. Anyway, I only say that because the number 3 person at the Vatican was just caught engaging in pedophilia, and it's very important that we track these stories, because if we don't, the mainstream media won't, and it's hard to get people to understand how widespread these pedophilia networks really are. And all this power, all these stories of control and power get me to one more story that I wanted to cover this week. On a little bit of a lighter note, Kid Rock is apparently, I haven't confirmed this, but apparently looking to run for Senate. And, you know, I don't know his political views. I know he supported Obama. I know he supported Trump, which makes me think he's a little bit of a free thinker, which is exciting. But more importantly than that, it's another person outside of the political paradigm who is breaking the mold that you don't have to come up through this corrupt political system to become a politician. Donald Trump, like him or not, boombastic businessman, certainly part of the corporate elite that bought politicians, but he didn't come up in the traditional sense. And now you have Kid Rock thinking about running for Senate, and maybe he'll win. And he's not a politician. And you have, I forget his name, you have a scientist running against Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts who hasn't come through the traditional political channels. You know, me, myself, I have not ruled out one day running for politics, not going through traditional channels, but building a media platform and then using it to run myself and really trying to take down this system of control that the political elite have really put forth. So I think it's important. Someone like Kid Rock is running. We'll see what he believes in. Obviously, that's important. But I think it's important to break down this political system of control, this two-party system. Republicans, Democrats, and neither side will talk to each other, and the country always drives in the same direction. I keep saying this, right? I should explain what I mean. Why do I say the country always drives in the same direction? I think if you study America, really since the early 1900s, yes, you have the politicians who always argue this or that, but the country always drives toward global policy, toward globalism. So the politicians will have their talks, and they'll say, oh, we're not going to have war, right? Obama campaigned against Bush's wars, and then all he did was support the Arab Spring, the overthrow of the government in Egypt, the overthrow of the government in Libya, the overthrow of the government in Syria, at least attempted overthrow. And all Obama did was expand wars, right? He got a Nobel Peace Prize for getting elected, and then all he did was, this is a statistic, literal statistic, he dropped a bomb in the Middle East every 20 minutes for 8 straight years, and was the only president in American history to be engaged in war for 8 straight years. So the country always drives in the same direction, and the United Nations and NAFTA, and it always drives toward globalism, no matter whether it's Republican or Democrat. And that's why I say it's really the Republicans and the Democrats versus the people, because they are controlled by mega corporations, right, that buy off the politicians, tax-exempt foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. That's why I said Google and Amazon pushing money toward net neutrality. I already demonstrated in one of my reports that Amazon, they'll push for higher taxation here in America, but what they don't want you to know is something called Operation Goldcrest is how Amazon avoids paying taxes with a secret agreement with the government of Luxembourg. So these globalist corporations buy the politicians, the Democrats and the Republicans, and they make sure that the politics in America always drives toward globalism, which is, say what you want about Trump. This is why I think his presidency is important. I don't agree with everything he does, but he did shut down the TPP, which was a globalist trade deal designed to erode American sovereignty, and the Paris Climate Agreement, which, again, regardless of how you feel about climate, I would argue that wasn't about the climate. That was about globalism and global control, creating eventually a carbon tax so that the United Nations and these global corporations have the power to tax through carbon, to tax the rest of society across borders, because once you have the ability to tax, you have the ability to set up global government. And I'm just introducing these ideas to you. I am going to show you all of this over time with my investigative reports where I show you the primary documents. I show you the books because I think this is so important. So I just wanted to touch base with you on these stories today. Basically, I wanted to show you how government power can be very dangerous, how the Department of Homeland Security scanning our faces at the airport is very dangerous, how the mainstream media doesn't even report on this, how there's no public conversation. The politicians don't make it a public conversation. No, this is just happening now. They're going to scan our faces. How another person tied to powerful people within the government, the DNC, Hillary Clinton, Peter Smith, just killed himself. He could have killed himself, but it shows the very danger of this spy state. How Ellen Weintraub, the head of the FEC, or the head Democrat at the FEC, is trying to use a Federal Exchange Commission power to use government authority to try to shut down Breitbart, to try to shut down InfoWars, to try to shut down the Drudge Report, these alternative news sources, whether you like them or not. Free conversation between people is the heartblood of freedom, because once that goes, once that disappears, once that erodes, then tyranny will take place, what Edward Snowden calls turnkey tyranny. Another way they do this is through political correctness. That's for another day. I don't want to go off too much on a tangent. How the war on cash, how Visa trying to get people to only accept credit cards and not cash. Again, it creates a situation with turnkey tyranny, where one day the government can have so much power that if you go against them, if you're someone like me who might try to expose, or a whistleblower like Snowden, someone like me who might try to expose corruption within the government can literally shut down all of your finances. So I'm trying to push a message of libertarianism, to understand that, yes, on its face, some of these things might look good. Oh, the government can come in and fix our problems. But far too often, the government is actually the one that creates these problems, and then the solutions they put in place that they sell to the public as being, oh, this is for something good, is actually something where the government could one day, either right off the bat or one day later, use for incredible abuse of power. Because wherever there is power, there will be corrupt people to claim it. So remember, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'm Tom Anderson, FFR News.